Let's get a songbook and turn to page 775. 775. Many of you know this. Sheila Thompson's husband passed away this last week, and his funeral is on Friday. And I've been working on funeral thoughts, and when I do that, this song always comes to my mind. So I just thought, well, we're just gonna sing it tonight. So we'll sing all four verses. We're here anyhow, so we might as well do that. If I could just remember how to play it now. Beyond the sunset, oh blissful morning, when with our Savior heaven is begun, earth's dwelling ended, all glorious dawning, beyond the sunset, when day is done, beyond the sunset, no clouds will gather, no storms will threaten, no fears annoy. O day of gladness, O day unending, beyond the sunset, eternal joy, beyond the sunset, a hand will guide me to God the Father, whom I adore. His glorious presence, His words of welcome will be my portion on that fair shore, beyond the sunset, oh glad reunion with our dear loved ones who've gone before, in that fair homeland, beyond no parting, beyond the sunset, forevermore. Brother Kermit, would you pray for us? Man, well, it is good to see everybody here tonight. a fine crowd out here on a Wednesday night, and nice fall weather out there today. You get a good cool of a morning, and not hot of an afternoon, but warm enough. And it's hard to complain. As much as we like to complain, it's hard to complain when you get weather like this, to be honest with you. We'll find a way, but it's hard to. And we should have new prayer lists. If you didn't get one, Mr. Rich has probably got some back there. And I'll remind you of some things coming up. We do have the Seedline Conference comes up on the 13th. I think that is a week from this Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. And so that Sunday night service will be at Seedline in Brazil, and it will start at 7 instead of 6. That will mess up a lot of things up as far as time-wise in your head. But 7 o'clock instead of 6, and it'll be packed out. There'll be a bunch, and Brother Kistler will be speaking, and he's an excellent speaker. He moves fast. He's unlike myself. He don't know how to stay behind a pulpit. He moves around. He shoots down them aisles and this aisles, but he's got a lot to say, and he does a good job. And then, of course, they got the ages who will be there singing. They are excellent. So it's well worth your time to go for that. And then we got also coming up the hayride at the Hoffadettes and all kinds of things going on there for teens on a Friday and juniors that morning, and then everybody else in the Saturday afternoon. So a lot of things happening this time of year. So get in on some. This Saturday, I believe it's this Saturday, the 5th, yes. This Saturday at 9 o'clock, we'll be having men's breakfast over there in the fellowship hall, if you can come be part of that. And I think that's all the extra announcements I got going on there. If you got a prayer list, here's some things that would ask you to put Sister Sheila Thompson on the write-ins and just pray for her. I talked to her a couple times this week, and she said there's this fellow lives down the road from her, just wears her out. He walks by the house so many times during the day. She said, I get tired just watching him. He walks so much. I told her, I said, I'm thinking about bringing my electric bike over here and ride alongside of him while he walks and talking with him. What's going on out there with everybody? We need to put it on the prayer list or update anyhow. Yes, ma'am? Okay. Okay. Andrew Collins. Oh, Andrew Collin. Okay. I'm trying to find where all these things are now. We've got. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'm trying to see where we had him on here. Okay, yeah, I see him. And we got the right first name now, right? Okay. But it is Brent. Okay. Yeah, I knew we was talking about it one day, and you kept saying Brent, and I said I don't have Brent on here, so we had the wrong name. But we got it right now. Yeah. Okay. I've I've not checked with Mrs. Turpin this week, see how she's doing. I'll try to get that done before the end of the week. She was supposed to come home from the hospital. Well, she's supposed to come home from the hospital on Monday, then she was supposed to come home on Tuesday. I think she came home yesterday, but I did not get a verification on that because until about 2 hours ago, I did not have my phone working at all. And here's why. Because people my age should not be allowed to have things like this. Verizon went out. People all over the country, and I was using it, and it just went out. It went to SOS. And then so I started talking to people. What do you do? They said, put it on airplane mode, then turn it back off airplane mode for a little while, and it'll try to pick up a signal. So I did that. Somewhere in the process of me going from airplane to non-airplane, I must have fell out without my parachute or something because I shut off the data, and I didn't know that. So everybody else has got their phone working, and mine's still not working. So Karen comes home today, and she gets in there, and she hits a couple buttons, and phone starts ringing. And I mean messages. They just started. I thought the smoke was going to come out of that thing. There was messages coming from everywhere. And so somehow, I think a hunk of stupid crawled up on me again, and I shut off my own phone. I didn't know it. But that happens a lot around my place. But I do not know. With all that said, I have not talked to them since yesterday early. Yesterday, they told me early that she was going to be coming home by 5 o'clock yesterday evening. But I do not know if she got to make that trip. I don't know if anybody in here knows anything about that or not. But I know we probably better not have her substitute teaching. Last year, when she taught for a week while Miss Kay was gone, she was in the hospital after that. Her heart's very weak. I think kindergartners is more than you can take with a weak heart. And this right over here, Mr. Kermit and Sister Maggie, everybody was asking me about them this week. I couldn't send you a message because my phone was out, but they live out in the middle of where 30th and Plum, 30 miles plumb out away from nowhere, and everybody in the world had their power back on except them. And the power company didn't want to pay no attention to them when they said, we don't have power. They said, you do too. And so eventually they got power, and but they was trying to come Sunday, but they said it just, without a shower, things was not just good, so they wasn't going to do it. Yes, ma'am. We also couldn't get the garage door open. Yes. Well, Diane knows what that's like. She couldn't get hers open either, so. What did we ever do? What did people do when they didn't have electricity? That's true. They didn't have that either. That's true. Did I see a hand somewhere? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. We've got her on here somewhere, don't we? Kay Browning? Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, they actually did this, and she brought it into me. She said, I cannot read your writing. She said, I put these names on here. She says, I'm not sure about this, Mr. Timberton. I said, well, that looks like a P in my writing. She says, oh. So I told her we would change it, so I'm glad you brought that up. That is Maverick Pemberton. With writing like mine, it's good the Lord knows what we're praying for, because we're praying for people that no one's ever heard of, because when they read it off my writing, they get the wrong name. Anything else going on? Everybody having a good week? Okay, well, if you'll hang on to your list, we will pray over that at the end of the service. And if you got your Bibles, let's open them to the book of Psalms chapter number 15. Psalms chapter number 15. I know some of you are getting tired of listening to me on Sunday morning, or Sunday school, and then Sunday morning, then Sunday night and Wednesday. So maybe we'll get Brad back up here to do something here for long. He'd been sitting around not doing anything, fishing. Has anybody seen the boys fishing, the videos, the Creek Brothers? How many of you have seen the Creek Brothers? Okay, well, the Creek Brothers it's worth watching just because the grandsons are on there and they're funny. But there's always something going on with that bunch right there. But that's good for them. Creek fishing, that's what they do. Okay, Psalms chapter number 15. We'll just read it first, then we'll make some thoughts and some comments about it. I've entitled it, The Heavenly Citizen. Verse 1 says, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness and speaketh the truth in his heart. He that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbor, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor, in whose eyes a vile person is contemned, but he honoreth them that fear the Lord. He that sweareth to his own hurt and changeth not. He that putteth not out his money to usury, nor taketh reward against the innocent. He that doeth these things shall never be moved. Now this is a pretty short psalm, but I think it's a great psalm, and it kind of gives us the picture of what I call a true citizen of heaven, or a true citizen of Zion. He talks in here in Psalms especially, it's referred to Zion quite a bit. The holy hill, a lot of times we talk about the holy hill of Zion. We sing songs along those lines, but it gives us a picture of this person who's they're saved. They're traveling to the city of God. They're on their way. That's us. We're here today. We're sojourning. We might have a house in this world, but this is not our home, and this is not where we belong. And so we're on our way. We're sojourning, and we're going to dwell someday with the Lord forever. But this psalm, you could say, is not really evangelical. It's more ethical in it. What I mean by that is, it tells us what a heavenly citizen is like, but it doesn't tell us how to become a heavenly citizen. Some people think it does. Some people think, okay, if I can walk right good and do good works and always speak the truth and get along with my neighbor, then I'll get to go to heaven. That's not going to happen. It's not going to get there. But that ought to be a characteristic of someone who's on their way to heaven. So I could have entitled this psalm "The Practical Christianity," and I like things like that. I like little thoughts that come through that kind of helps us to see some things that's going on. But there in verse 1, he asks a question, kind of like a twofold question, and I'm going to look at it here again. He says, "Who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill?" Now I read that and I wonder what's the significance of saying this the way they did it, or what's the difference between what he's saying. And so I looked up a lot of things and a lot of different people and what they had to say about it. And for the most part, people say it this way: it's a reference to the church here on this earth. The militant church, you might call it, that's typified by the tabernacle. And so he's saying, who's going to abide here in your tabernacle, and then who's going to dwell in their holy hill, or that would be the church in heaven, or the church triumphant, they call it. And so the fact is, as we just said, you don't just sign a list and say, I think I'll go to heaven. No, before you can go to heaven, you have to be a member of God's church here on this earth. So the psalmist is like he's asking this question. He's saying, Lord, who are they that really belong to the church down here? The ones that are traveling through this life, and they're headed to that heavenly city. He said, describe them to me. So he's not asking for names. It's not like I want a list of people that you think that is on their way to heaven. But he's saying, what are these people like? And then the whole rest of the psalm kind of is God's description of these, I call them privileged pilgrims, who's journeying Zionward, journeying toward the place where we're going to live with the Lord forever. So I thought tonight, and again, this is very short, and if you're wishing for long sermons, Wednesday night's a bad time to come. But But I thought tonight we ought to test ourselves by God's idea of the Christian life and just figure out who are these heavenly citizens? What do they look like? If you're looking around on this earth, what do these people look like? Now again, you don't get to heaven by what you do, but if you're on your way to heaven, people ought to be able to look at you and say that I'm pretty sure they're a Christian just by certain things. And he names them. And for one, it's one whose life, I would say, is blameless. Verse 2 says, he that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness and speaketh the truth in his heart. So the thought contained there in that word uprightly is not that he's a perfect person. There's nobody like that. There's people that think so. Someone told me today, they was joking about something. They said, well, they was talking to somebody else about me. They said, well, Wes is not perfect like you think you are. And I said, wait, I'm not? And I said, I didn't know that. And so, but there's none. But it doesn't mean we're but we're without blame. In fact, Paul says something about it in Philippians chapter 2. He says that you may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. So some people have a tendency to think, okay, our environment makes us terrible people. We can't help it. People can't help it because this is the way everybody living around them is. Well, Paul says you and I who are saved, we ought to be blameless and we ought to be harmless, the sons of God without rebuke. And then he says it's in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. So Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, but there wasn't a whole lot of people running around going to church and doing things right in those days. In fact, after preaching for 120 years, not one of them got into the ark. That's how wicked people were in those days. And so we're never going to be sinless down here, but he says, I want you to be blameless. And one of the ways, when you do things wrong, you take care of it. You confess to the Lord. If you somehow harmed someone else, if you've somehow done someone else wrong, you confess that. You make those things right. That's what God expects from us. But it's our character that's to be blameless. It's what we are in God's sight, what we really know we are in our own heart. Now, people can put on a show and they can cover things up, but we're to be blameless, he says, in our character. But I like the way that this verse covers our walk, it covers our work, and it covers our word. It says we're to walk uprightly, we're to work righteousness, and I would say this, our faith shows itself by what we do. If people really trust the Lord, James says that they'll know by your works. And then they know it. So he said we're to be blameless in how we walk, and we're to be blameless in how we speak, the things we've got to say. And how is that possible? Now remember, he said up here in Philippians, Paul said, be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation. How can I do that? Well, the secret of being able to do what it says there in Philippians 2:15 goes back to 2 verses before. In Philippians 2:13, the Bible says, for it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of his good pleasure. I can't do all the things, I can't react to things right, but if I'm submitted to God, he'll help me get through things. And when I'm about to blow my temper, he'll remind me that you belong to me. And as I said last week, there's people watching, you can control those things. And it is funny how this is crazy, but I'm trying to think of the old Andy Griffith show, the husband and wife, they just fight and they just go on, and somebody call them for disturbing the peace. And as soon as Andy get there, well, hi Andy, come on in, have some coffee. And it's obvious people can control things, but we don't sometimes. So it says that. Well, let's move on. So a heavenly citizen, I say he's blameless, not perfect, but he's blameless. He takes care of things when he does things wrong. He walks in a pretty bad nation, pretty bad place, but he can still walk with God. But then also I'd say a heavenly citizen is someone who's they're charitable towards their neighbor, if I could use that word. He said, verse 3, he that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbor, nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. So I would say, you could say charitable toward his neighbor, just is toward others, is what it amounts to. Charitable toward others. And it says it this way for us in the New Testament. It says, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So the test of our love to our neighbor is, with our tongue and with our hearing, with our what we say about them and what we hear about them. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if there's somebody you don't like, and here's a good example. If your phone works better than mine did this week, there's all kinds of things comes up there. All kinds of, now this will be hard to believe, but it's not all true. There's some of that stuff comes across there not true. But if you really dislike somebody, we're getting ready to have an election. So wherever you stand in that election, likely you hate one side and you think the other side's great. And likely you're wrong. But the fact is, we do that. And so it's real easy for us to hear the things that are awful about the people we don't like. And we have to be careful about that. He says we love our neighbor. God's saying we need to be slow to say and slow to hear things that are harmful of other people. You want to talk to me, if somebody comes up to you and starts wanting to tell you let me tell you what I know about the preacher. Tell them, no, I don't need to know. Now, let's go sit down and talk to the preacher about it. That'll stop a lot of that stuff. And not just the preacher, but other people. If somebody wants to come around and talk to you about somebody and drag them down, well, let's go get them. We'll all three have this conversation. That probably won't go along very well, but it would help a lot. And so, but I can give you some other verses that go along with this. I'm talking about being charitable towards your neighbor. Leviticus 19 says, "Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people." A talebearer, what's it mean? Well, he's talking about, the one fellow said a talebearer, he's sort of like a peddler who's going from house to house selling what he's got. We do that sometimes. We got something on our mind about somebody, and we sell our friends on things that may not be true, but we sell our friends on them, and sometimes fellow believers. And so he said, don't be like the talebearer. And then Paul says over in Thessalonians, he says, "For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies." Now, that's not a good thing. And then he's writing to another preacher there in 1 Timothy. He says, "And withal, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not." Now, I know this is hard to believe, but there are people, good church people, that spend a lot of their time busybodies. I've always told people, beware of busybodies. Years ago, there was a lady in this church. She's passed away now, but she would call me, and I knew when she called, she was trying to get information. And she would throw out a few things and then wait for my response, and I'd give her all these responses. Yes, no, I never give her anything. And after a while, she got where she didn't call me near as much, but she called other people because she was trying to get some information on them. And I don't know what makes people survive on that or what makes people thrive on it, why they want to do it, but some do. And but the Bible says to stay away from it. James says, "If any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, he deceiveth his own heart. This man's religion is vain." So he said, if you can't even control your tongue, what you've got's not doing you much good. But I think a good prayer that we could all pray would be the one that David prayed in the Psalms. He says, "Set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth. Keep the doors of my lips." I think that's a good prayer. And so again, my thought is this chapter is not telling me how to get to heaven. But this chapter is telling me if you're on your way to heaven, here's some things that ought to be about you. Number one, you ought to be blameless. People shouldn't be able to say, "Oh, yeah, he's doing this, he's practicing this." They might be able to say he did this, but I remember years ago we had one of our presidents, and someone began to try to tear him down and said, "Well, didn't you do drugs or do this when you was in college and all this?" And he said, "Yeah, but that was before I met the Lord." That kind of shut them all up because that just meant I took care of that. I've confessed it. It's over. And so he says, don't do those things. Stay away from that. Keep a lock on my lips. So be charitable to their neighbors. Be blameless. And then the third thing I see here is we're careful in verse 4. We're careful with our friendships. "In whose eyes a vile person is condemned, but he honoreth them that fear the Lord." So in the first part of this verse, we have a negative and a positive of what would be the right type of people to run with. And we don't think about this because we're old. I mean, it doesn't matter when you're 65 years old. It doesn't matter who your friends are. It's those kids that you got to be careful of. You got to tell the kids, be careful with your friends, and that is true. You have to tell kids, but the fact is, we have to do the same thing as adults. We have a tendency sometimes to listen to the wrong people, and we're always going to be surrounded by ungodly people, people that do not think the way the Bible teaches. They don't. That doesn't mean they're awful people. If you go to work, the majority of the people you work around probably don't think too much of a God and too much of spiritual things. So you don't hate those people, and you don't not associate with them, but you don't make them your best friend. You don't have them over every night and have conversations and do everything with them, because you cannot be true to God if your closest companions are always ungodly people. And yet I know people, I know one fellow in particular, you can't hardly get him to get in. He tells me he's saved, he says, but I just don't like being around a lot of people, he says. But he's always around a lot of people, just not any church people. He's around a lot of people that are ungodly and everything else, but he's uncomfortable in church. There's something wrong there. If you're uncomfortable around God's people, but you feel real comfortable around the ungodly. And so James says the friendship of the world is enmity with God. The book of Luke says you cannot serve two masters, God and mammon. So it's a simple thought to me. How bad can the influence of a bad friend be? Pretty bad. And then how good can the influence of a good friend be? On the other side, very good. And so I can't remember this fellow's name, but he was a great man. But they asked him one day for the reason for his success. Here was his reply was, he said, well, I had a friend. You see, the friend helped him to become who he was. And so I encourage people, and I especially encourage our young people, make friends with God's children. That's why I love there's so many kids over here. And you go to churches and they don't have kids, and so they need friends. And I love it that these kids come, they think of church as it's just a second home. I mean, they get out of the car, they're ready, they know their friends here, they go to do this, they go do that, and when you get, so a lot of times we have a tendency when we get old, we don't want any kids, we don't want them to move, we don't want them to run, we don't want them to be loud. That's kids. Let's let them be kids and be glad that they got friends here and buddies, and yeah, we may have to slow them down if they start putting holes in the walls and things like that. We might have to do a little something, but I think it's great that we have a lot of kids, and as far as they know, everybody in here is their friends. And that's good too. And so a heavenly citizen, he's blameless, he's charitable toward his neighbors, he's careful with friendships, and then he's one that his word is his bond. If he tells you something, he's going to do it. It says in the last part of verse 4, he that sweareth to his own hurt and changes not. What's that mean? He keeps his promises. That means if you make a promise to somebody, and then later you discover, you know what? This is to my disadvantage, this promise. You keep it anyhow, because he doesn't set it. And I could give you examples of people doing things, and I don't have Facebook, but my wife does, and so it's the same as me having it, because I read people's stuff on there. And I just seen one the other day where somebody was upset about they saved money and they had all this. They was going to buy something, and the person told him, he said, it's whoever pays cash. And so they came back and it was gone, and so they was threatening them and all that. Well, that's kind of a crazy thing. But on the other side of that, if I tell you I'll sell you a car for $3,000, and then right along about 10 minutes later somebody comes and says, I'll give you $5,000 for it, what should I do? Well, I might offer you an extra half of that bonus in between. I don't know what we should do, but what you need to do is just say, okay, I can't do that. I already sold this for $3,000. That's what we ought to do. And so I just feel like God will always honor us in a case like that. So he says, he that sweareth to his own hurt and changes not. It's a sad thing when Christians break their word and can't be trusted. If you can't trust a Christian, then this world's in a mess. It's really getting bad when it gets to that place. And then now again, that's not really the world's way of doing things, but that's God's way of doing things, and that should be our way. We ought to do things that way. So be people of our word. And then a fifth characteristic I see of heavenly citizens is they're merciful in the way they deal with others. He says, he that putteth not out his money to usury, nor taketh reward against the innocent. Now, when I first read that, I kind of thought, well, that means you shouldn't loan people money. And I know people that wouldn't. They would never do that. I won't loan much because I don't have any. But what he's talking about here is when Christians are kind of maybe helping somebody or in the place of help, but they're trying to make money off of them. They're trying to make quite a bit of profit off of them, and maybe I can give you some examples of this. I'll not do it, but so people that they're kind of generous and they're giving to the church, but they're not too generous to the people that work for them and things. They're kind of shortcutting all those people, and when they should be treating them better. So the fact is, God's people should never make unjust gains. Somebody might need something. It's if you can never loan money to somebody, you're better off. But if you did do it, then don't try to take advantage of that person. Myself, this is just an opinion, but myself, if I was going to loan you, I wouldn't charge anybody interest. Of course, I don't have enough to loan, but even if I did, I don't think I would. Now, I'm not saying if I was a bank, I wouldn't do that, because you're going to go out of business if you don't. But don't be trying to win at somebody. That's why we tell people that gambling's wrong. Because if you think about it, ethically and spiritually, it's wrong for the simple reason that I cannot be a winner in that without you having to lose. So I'm taking advantage of you. And now, granted, I know there's all kinds of things goes on, and the people ought to know what they're getting into when they do that. And I'm sure there's lots of little. If you're in an NFL thing, somebody's probably got $1 or $2 in there, and I'm not going to stand up here and preach on that all day. But the fact is, people get out of control with things. I've got a friend that I went to school with, and best of my knowledge, I don't know if he's ever been married. If he was, it was a short time. But anytime I ever hear any conversation about him, all it is about him somewhere trying to make money off of gambling. It's controlled his life, and he's not the person he used to be, so it's tough. And I had a fellow one time tell me, he said, "Well, you put money in stock market, and that's the same thing." Well, no, it's not, because if I put my money in stock market, for me to win, they have to win, or we both lose. So we're going as a team. We're in there fighting together, and it's either win-win or lose-lose. But I'm not going. Someone else does not have to lose in order for me to win. And I spent enough time on that, but I thought I'd throw all that out. But then the last words there in verse number 5, he says, "He that doeth these things shall never be moved." In the New Testament language, we would say it this way in 1 John 2, "And the world passes away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever." Never be moved. But now I want to be clear before we quit on this, that if you're trying to live this good life that it's talking about here in Psalms 15, it will never make you a Christian. If you set out to do all of those things and you work the best you can to be this person that he's talking about, it will never make you a Christian. It does not tell us the way to be saved. It tells us the way saved people should live. Romans chapter 3, and I'll emphasize this with some more verses, says, "Therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin." So by doing everything that is required in the law, it will not make you justified in his sight. That it's just given to show you that you cannot get everything done that you ought to. And of course, everybody knows Ephesians 2 says, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." And then over in the book of Titus, the Bible says, "Not by works of righteousness, which we have done." So it's not by what I can get done that's going to put me in good standing with God, but according to his mercy, he saved us by the washing of regeneration and the renewing of the Holy Ghost. So the whole point tonight is talking about heavenly citizens. Are we one? Do we belong there? Now, granted, this is a Wednesday night, so I would say likely people that are here on Wednesday night, somewhere in your life you've decided, I'm going to follow the Lord, and you've accepted him as your Savior. But we need to know that. Are we Christians? And the main thing that we're pointing out tonight is if we are, then we ought to just live like it. And God's people ought to live like God's people. It shouldn't be difficult for people, especially in the world we live today, it shouldn't be difficult for people to see, they're not like everybody else. Because the world's a strange place we live, and people have strange ideas, and so it should not be hard to pick out those who are trying to follow the Lord, and people would say, "There's a citizen of heaven. I want what they've got." So that's my encouragement. We're saved. Let's live like we're saved, and that's just a few thoughts there from Psalms chapter number 15. And we're way too early. Kids are not out. but you'll have a little time to talk amongst yourself when you're done. So if you've got a prayer list, I thank you again for coming and being part of the service tonight. If you have a prayer list, if we can spend a little time there, and then we'll see you Saturday for breakfast or Sunday at church or somewhere. But thanks for coming tonight.